Okay, good evening, Democrats and friendly unaffiliateds and other members of the opposition. I'm Vicki Shea. Okay, yes, for sure. Um, the chair of the Farrington Democratic Club, and we're here live in the Gathering Place, which is the Homeowners Association building, and we also have friends zooming in who are going to be listening. And we do announce these talks to the local Democratic clubs and precincts. And other people who asked to be on the announcement list for the Zooms. So we do have a lot of people there also. I have one announcement and 4 quick reminders. The one announcement, in case you haven't heard, is that Phil Berger conceded this afternoon. So he will not be the most powerful man in the Senate anymore for 2 years at least. So that was great news. Okay, here are the reminders. Please turn off your cell phones. Uh, Please don't throw out the plastic beverage cups. They're hard plastic, and we take them home, and we, meaning Mary, takes them home and washes them in the dishwasher, and then we use them again in the next month. So they're not disposable, but they are hygienic. To ask a question, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. We have 2 people who will be looking for raised hands, and will bring the microphone to you. That makes it so much easier for everyone to hear, and nobody is as loud as he or she thinks he or she is. So the microphone helps, and also it lets the Zoom audience hear the question as well as the answer. People who are watching on Zoom live can type questions into the chat box, and we'll read them out. And finally, you don't need to put the chairs up at the end. We hire someone to set them up and then to come back and put them down and close up the building. So.
Can I interrupt you for just a moment?
Yes.
More reminder. I'll speak loud enough that everybody can hear. For those who are interested in it, on May 16th, we are having the annual or semi-annual FHA Green Sea shredding event. Here in the parking lot, Saturday, May 16th, 3rd Saturday in May. All are welcome.
Thank you. That was loud enough. And just, okay, I'll do one reminder, but then we're not going to do a bulletin board here. But the No Kings demonstration is on Saturday, starting at 11, but people will arrive early to music at the Justice Center, which some people call the new courthouse. And there's something like 30 of them, and maybe more, in North Carolina. So little towns are coming out amazingly, and it would be very important to do. And the people in Galloway Ridge who don't feel that they can go to Pittsburgh and fight all of that are going to be demonstrating on the corner of Weathersfield and 15501, right? So, yay.
Galloway Bridge, we're going to start at 10:30 a.m. on the corner of Weathersfield and 5501. So people running into Pittsburgh can see us waving and cheering them on. 10:30.
At 10:30, they're going to start because they want to be visible for the traffic heading towards Pittsburgh. Okay, our speaker tonight is already known and admired by many Farrington residents as the former president of the Farrington Homeowners Association. Rose Krasnow and her husband Steve retired to Farrington in 2019 after many years in the DC area. But this was not her first stint in North Carolina. She received her master's degree in urban planning from UNC Chapel Hill. More recently, she served 2 terms on the City Council of Rockville, Maryland, and 3 terms as the mayor of that city. She then worked for the National Governors Association in Washington, D.C., before becoming deputy director of the Montgomery County Planning Department. So she knows what she's talking about when it comes to local government and planning. And her provocative topic tonight is rapid growth in Chatham County. Are the planners getting it right? Rose Krasnow.
I'm always short. And when I was first elected to the city council in Rockville, the mayor when I was first elected was 6'4". So he would raise it up to there, and I always spoke after him, and I would always pull it down. But thank you, Vicki, for the introduction. I am going to work hard to make sure that I stay close to the mic. Having been at many of these meetings as an audience member, I know how important that is. Recently, many months after I had told Vicki that I would speak on this topic, I received an invitation to attend an event at the Friday Center to hear an urban geography professor at UNC speaking on the triangle, best place to live, question mark. Oh, I said it wrong. Best place to live in the US, question mark. The invite, I thought, was worded quite well. It said, the Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill region is now one of the nation's fastest growing destinations for people who are leaving their homes in search of affordability, opportunity, and a better quality of life. Her presentation will explore why the triangle attracts newcomers and what that rapid growth means for housing, consumer costs, environmental sustainability, and a shared sense of place for those who already live here. Can the triangle grow without repeating the inequalities and environmental challenges our new neighbors hope to escape? And then she went on to say that this conversation invites reflection on how today's choices will shape the region for generations. Wow, I thought, that sounds like what I was going to talk about. And I would have attended her lecture, except it's tonight. Dueling banjos, you might say. So let me start by making it clear that I am not a professor or a researcher, but I do have a background that makes me particularly interested in both politics and urban growth. As you heard in the intro, I earned my master's in urban planning from UNC a long, long time ago. And since then, I have been both a mayor, and trust me, there are not many mayors who have a degree in urban planning. And I worked as deputy director of a very unusual organization with the complicated name of Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, better known as MMCPPC for short. MMCPPC was actually created in 1927. It was designed to be a regional organization consisting of two counties, Montgomery County, Maryland, and Prince George's County, Maryland, both of which lie just north of Washington, D.C. And the idea was to get planners to look at growth from a more regional perspective. The other idea was to try and take the political aspect out of planning. Great idea. Very hard to implement. After having a single planning board for about 30 years, the two counties decided that they really needed to each have their own planning board. And so while MMCPPC still exists, and they have a, quote, central office that handles paychecks and things like that, really the two organizations are now almost completely separate. But to make things even more complicated, MMCPPC was created by the state, but it is actually funded by the counties. So I can assure you that politics does indeed get involved, since very few things are more political than growth. Nevertheless, over the years, both counties, but particularly Montgomery County, which is where I was working, became known for some very innovative planning. And I'm going to cite several examples because I think it will help us with our further discussion. Inclusionary zoning. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that topic, but inclusionary zoning is defined as any program or policy that either requires or incentivizes the creation of affordable housing whenever new development occurs. Believe it or not, Montgomery County, Maryland in 1973 was the very first county in the country, very first really jurisdiction in the country to adopt inclusionary zoning. Most of the programs that exist today were created after 2000, and of course, many jurisdictions, such as Chatham County, North Carolina, don't have any inclusionary zoning program. I will talk more about this later, but I just want you all to know that the law in Montgomery County has gotten tougher since 1973. And basically, for any development of more than 20 homes, it started at 50 and then it went down to 40, and now it's 20, that any development of more than 20 homes requires that somewhere between 12.5% and 15% of all the new homes in that development must be affordable to people earning between 65 and 70% of the area median income. And we'll get back to that. Forest preservation. Montgomery County's forest conservation law, which was last updated December 29th, 2025, is based on Maryland's Forest Conservation Act. And it aims to protect, plant, and maintain trees and forests for the many benefits they provide to the county's residents. The latest version of the Forest Conservation Law requires the county to achieve no net loss of forest. Think about that. Not easy to do if you're cutting down all these trees to build all these homes. It does this by requiring that anyone subject to the law must meet a calculated forest retention or forest planting requirement, either by planting or protecting forests with forest conservation easements, or purchasing credits from one of the county's forest mitigation banks. And what that really means is if somebody is willing to use their land to grow trees, they can pay to get those trees, plant those trees, so they get credit for doing all that, or contributing to the county's forest conservation fund. Since the Forest Conservation Law first went into effect in 1992, the Planning Department has approved development applications that have permanently protected over 12,500 acres of existing forest and more than 2,500 of newly planted forests within more than 3,500 forest conservation easements across Montgomery County. Another thing we did, stormwater management. Given some of the storms we've had here recently, a few more laws on the books might be a good idea. Beginning in 1982, Montgomery County sought to mitigate the impacts of new development and redevelopment activities through the implement of stormwater best management practices, better known as BMPs. Now, both as a mayor and as a planner, I always used to somewhat smile at the term best management practices. What does that mean? That means it's the best we know how to do at the moment. It doesn't mean it's the best thing you can do. And I have seen it change even in Montgomery County many times from what they thought was the best. We thought at one point we were going to have a new lake built near us because they thought the best way to collect stormwater runoff was in a big single facility. Then they decided, no, a lot of stormwater management ponds were the way to go. Those were never terribly popular with a lot of people because they attracted trash, and you had to kind of fence them off to keep little kids out. Everyone worried about mosquitoes. Uh, and now they really have decided that you need almost a stormwater retention facility for every 3 houses. I'm not kidding. It's really, and then they expect the homeowner to keep them up. And so, like I say, not always the best practice, but the best we got at the moment. These BMPs are intended to address the impacts of impervious surface. An impervious surface is one like a rooftop, a sidewalk, a parking lot, where the water absolutely cannot be absorbed into the soil. And it prevents the rainwater from soaking in. And all that runoff is taken into Bush Creek, or, I'm still talking about Montgomery County, but it happens here too. And it's discharged into our local streams. And the idea of managing that is that it's necessary to reduce both the amount and the velocity of runoff, to direct it into stream channels, to try and improve the direction into stream channels, because as this water runs off, it obviously washes off all those chemicals people put on their lawns, and all the oil that it accumulates when cars park in parking lots. And these waters, when bigger storms occur, of course, could cause serious erosion and local flooding. Another thing we did in Montgomery County, impact fees. Development impact fees enable jurisdictions to collect revenue for new or expanded public facilities or services that are necessitated by new residential or commercial development. The idea being that you don't want your current residents to have to pay for all the new infrastructure that's required. You want to basically shift that cost to those who are responsible for that new development. Montgomery County has a dubious reputation of having some of the highest impact fees in the country. For example, for each newly constructed single-family house, a developer is required to pay a transportation impact fee of $30,190. That's per house, and a school's impact fee of $26,084. And just one more, the agricultural preserves. The Montgomery County Agricultural Preserve is a 93,000 acre state recognized area in Maryland. It was established in 1980 to protect farmland and rural space. And that 93,000 acres represents a third of the county's acreage. As I said, the purpose was to preserve farmland and prevent non-farm commercial development or high-density housing. How do we do it? Well, we downzone the land. We downzone it to one house per 25 acres, and we restrict the extension of public sewer services, all with the intent to discourage sprawl. To compensate landowners, because this land is very valuable, we created something called a TDR, another wonderful acronym that stands for Transferable Development Right. And what that does is a farmer can sell the density he would have had to a developer who pays him for that, and then they literally are buying density, and they can go into an area where lots of infrastructure already exists, schools, the metro, a bus service, et cetera, and they can go higher, and they can build more units than the zoning code would otherwise allow. So that way the farmers don't feel like they've, really been shafted, so to speak. So now let's turn to Chatham County. I need to preface this part of my talk by telling you that I am actually a very big fan of growth. When I was mayor, I started something called Walking Town Meetings. One Saturday a month, with prior preparation by our wonderful staff, we would go into different neighborhoods in the city, and anyone who came out and wanted to walk the planned route with the mayor and council could do so. And what we wanted to see firsthand was areas of concern. Sometimes they were little, like, oh, that street lamp has been out for 2 months now, and can't you do something about it? To issues that were a little bigger, like, we've been trying to get a stop sign at this intersection for the last 10 years, and someone's going to have to die before we get it. But we also asked them just their thoughts about the city in general. And I would have to say that the most common thing we heard was that they didn't like how fast the city was growing. In their minds, they wanted Rockville to be like it was in the 50s. And mind you, they were very happy that the growth meant that we not only didn't have to raise their taxes, we were often able to actually lower their taxes, but that was a little, in order to keep, because their property values kept going up. So in order to keep their taxes the same, we actually had to lower the tax rate, which is a lot better than the other way around, obviously. So they were happy about that. And they were happy that we had great snow removal in Rockville, that we built wonderful performance venues like Strathmore Hall in the county, that one was. They got great police services. So they liked all that, but they just didn't like all the change. To which I would always tell them that in my mind, a city that doesn't grow dies. And that's really what we're seeing a lot of right now in the Northeast and the Midwest, where industries have closed, taxes have gone up, and people are looking for a more amenable place to live. Hence, the triangle. And what's not to like? More and more companies and jobs are moving here for the climate, the lower cost of living, good infrastructure, and the willingness of the state to offer meaningful incentive packages. But the question of whether the planners in Chatham will get it right is a whole different issue. And so let me address this. I moved here in 2019, but I wasn't new to the area. As you heard, I got my master's here in 73-4-5, which was just about the time Farrington Village was getting started. Then both my kids went to UNC. And so I have been following the growth of Farrington and have always loved that it had its own village center with a restaurant most of the time and an independent bookstore, and that so many trees had been preserved, and that each of the 12 phases built by Fitch Creations looked different from one another. And yet, even though I am a strong proponent of growth, many of you and others have heard me say, I really wish I had moved here 5 years earlier, because I really love driving around with seeing all the trees on the side of the road. And I love the rural nature of the county, and I know that that is changing. But do I blame what is happening totally on the planners? Not entirely. But let's look at that a little more deeply. When we moved here in 2019, the population of the town of Pittsboro was just over 4,000 people. Today it is close to 5,200. Since 2020, Pittsboro's population has increased more than 13%, according to the World Population Review. Likewise, Chatham County's population in 2010 was just under 64,000. In 2026, the population is estimated to be approximately 88,000, which means that Chatham has grown more than 37% in that time. And I think I can safely say, without doing a lot of research, that the planning staff in both Pittsboro and the county were probably completely unprepared for the magnitude of that growth. When I was mayor, we had a parcel of land just to the north of the city. It wasn't even part of Rockville at that time. It was a big farm. It was known as the King Farm. And the King Farm was considered, as many things are, the last great undeveloped piece of land in the county. There are a few others of those too, but that's the way it was being marketed. Well, it turns out that the IRS decided that when the elder king had passed away and his heirs took over the property, that they had not properly declared the value of that farm. And they basically went after him for so much in additional taxes that the kings declared bankruptcy. In bankruptcy court, the judge gave the city of Rockville exactly 1 year to figure out the entire development plan for that site, or he was not going to let us annex it into the city. Now, this was when communities known as neo-traditional developments, which are like Briar Chapel, where you have grid streets as opposed to cul-de-sacs, where you have houses that are so close to one another that, as one person said in a hearing at the planning board, well, we live so close that we only need one iron on our block. We just open the window and hand it to the person next door. So we were trying to create the King Farm, again, as a neo-traditional community because they're good in so many ways. All cars aren't funneled into a single street. Neighbors really are more able to mingle with other neighbors. They don't have to cut through backyards if they want to see or play with Johnny, who lives right behind them. There are a lot of good things to a neo-traditional community. But our planners had never approved one before. And it took everything we had to get one 2,400 home development approved in a year. Now, if you think about what's been going on with Chatham Park, where they have approved 22,000 rooftops, even though it can probably take a while to develop, I think that it's really a problem. So yes, I don't think the planners were nearly prepared. I don't think the state of North Carolina has ever had many laws on the books anywhere close to the type of laws that we had up north, so to speak. And I'm sure many of you have heard that back in the 80s and 90s, deals in this area, it was not unusual to have handshake deals or even a backroom deal on occasion. I won't mention any specifics, but there's one in this community. So let me just mention a few of the areas where I really feel that the county wasn't prepared. Most of you know what my first one probably is going to be because, of course, it's what got me so ensconced in this community to begin with, and that's wastewater. When Jordan Lake was created in the early 70s, Orange County, Durham County, and yes, even Wake County, asked for the right to discharge a certain amount of treated sewage in the new lake. Chatham County did not. Even though most of the lake, which covers more than 47,000 acres, lies within Chatham County. Planners and elected officials at that time either were not forward-thinking enough or simply could not imagine the growth that would be coming their way 50 years later. Indeed, the only entity in all of Chatham County that asked for such a permit was Fitch Creations, which requested the right to release 500,000 gallons, it sounds like a lot, it's not really that much, of treated sewage a day into Jordan Lake. Even in 2002, when Briar Chapel was just getting underway, the only way they could possibly get approval was to provide their own wastewater treatment plant and then to spray the water that was treated on spray fields within their own community because they could not have any of it flow into Jordan Lake. And I have to add and I saw this up in Montgomery County too, so the developer had to build that wastewater treatment plant, and it wasn't of the highest quality because developers, and RB Fitch is an exception, usually plan to build out a community in about 7 years, and then they turn it over to a homeowners association and they get out of Dodge. And so if they aren't using the best materials, if some things are maybe being going a little uphill when you really want them to be going downhill, it's not that unusual. And of course, Briar Chapel, as we all know, has had so many problems with their wastewater treatment facility, and yet the regulations in the county still have not changed. I know that Jason Welch was on the task force, Jason's in the back, that was put together to try and see what changes could be made. Could Chatham County perhaps link up with OWASA, which is the Orange County Water and Sewer Authority, or even with Wake County? But unfortunately, the recommendations that the task force came up with have been completely ignored. And now we see development really forging ahead in this county, and each developer has to figure out the wastewater issue on their own, usually by providing a very small, not particularly functional or environmental wastewater treatment plant and spraying the water somewhere near them. Another issue that concerns me in this county is affordable housing, which I talked about in Montgomery County as being something absolutely required. Again, the record here is not so good, either in Pittsburgh or the rest of the county. Unlike Montgomery, there is nothing on the books that requires developers to provide affordable housing. And now is really the time, because when you're getting all these houses, if we had a requirement, then we would really get some. But rather what we get is promises. I've attended a lot of meetings down in Pittsburgh for the commissioners, and you hear someone who's just bringing forward a new development assure everyone that they're going to provide affordable housing. They get the approval, and the affordable housing kind of disappears. Now, I have never lived anywhere where affordable housing wasn't a controversial issue. I'm not saying it's simple. In Montgomery County, what we found was that we had this high requirement, and the builders would, let's say you got approved for 1,000 homes, and 850 of them were full priced, and 150 were supposed to be affordable. Well, they would build the 850 homes that they could make money on first, leaving the rest to the end. And then they would group them together, and that was bad because we don't want them all to be known as the cheap part of town or that sort of thing. So we started requiring developers to provide them at the same rate as they were building full-priced homes. We had developers say, I can't tell you how many people would come to me in either of my jobs and say, well, I'm meeting the requirement by providing housing for the elderly. Doesn't that count? Well, Montgomery County is only one of the richest counties in the country, and the elderly were rich too, and no, that did not count. But they thought it would. In any case, it seems to me that in this area, I have heard a lot more about affordable housing, but I haven't seen a whole lot of it actually produced. So I could keep going, but I on that subject, but I won't. I do want to mention that while Montgomery County did some wonderful things, one of my issues with planning is, and I've said this from the day I became an urban planner, there are too many paradoxes. If you want to save your beaches, you put in 5-acre lot restrictions. If you put in 5-acre lot restrictions, only the rich have access to the beaches. Other problems that I've seen, just trying to remember some of them. Let's see if I have them here. I know I'll come back to them because, I was going to say in Montgomery County, when everyone suddenly started building high-rise condominiums, and they still had to provide 12.5% as affordable. Okay, people could afford to buy them, but they couldn't afford to pay the monthly condo fees, which came out to be about $1 a foot. So affordable housing really is a complicated topic, but it's one that should not just therefore be ignored because the need for it is still so great. So yes, I think that, and I should also add that everything we did in Montgomery County just kept raising the cost of buying a house in Montgomery County, and we've already seen that part of it down here. I mean, when my husband and I moved here in 2019, we don't remember really any houses on the market being over $1 million. And now it seems like almost every house that's on the market is close to $1 million. So all the costs that we put in for builders in Montgomery County, trust me, they weren't being absorbed by the by the developers in Montgomery County. They were being passed directly on to the purchasers. And even the ag reserve, obviously, if you take out a third of that land, you're raising the value of the other land where developers could build. And they were always coming to us asking us, please, please, please get rid of the ag reserve. So it's not simple if you're a planner. And I do think that the planners are doing absolutely the best with the tools that they have. And I think that the elected officials are trying to get ahead of the curve. In 2018, they adopted the new Unified Development Ordinance, and that was certainly an attempt to try and keep the more rural parts of Chatham County rural while concentrating the density in, right here in the northeast part of the county. So I don't think that the Unified Development Ordinance went far enough, and I have been disturbed that both elected officials and planners seem so willing to waive certain requirements. Again, a prime example was right here. When they did the Unified Development Ordinance and put the zoning on the land along 15501, they put a 300-foot buffer around Farrington Village, where it borders 15501. But as soon as they were asked to grant a waiver for encroachment into that buffer, they granted a waiver for encroachment into the buffer. And fortunately, it didn't end up getting used. The only way that buffer could be removed was for the requester of the buffer to act, which was the developer of Briar Chapel, to actually ask for it to be removed. And the FHA worked very hard to convince them that even though they had no intention to ever use it, now that the deal between Farrington and Briar Chapel and wastewater fell apart, it took several years for us to get them to ask that the buffer be removed. And likewise, on the car wash that they're still talking about building over near the new O2 Fitness, they too asked for an encroachment into the buffer. And thanks to many of you who showed up at the county commissioners' meetings, that has been denied, at least for now. But that one's still a little bit open because it's still tied up in court. So like I say, planning has never been perfect. And I think that when I got into politics, I actually got into it because I was a citizen activist, kept going to City Hall. I kept speaking for or against something that I thought was going to affect my community. And I always laugh at this story. And when there was a vacancy on the city council back in 1991, the incumbent men knew they needed a woman, so they asked me to run with them, which is how my whole political career got started, really and truly. Little did I know that when I moved down here, I would pretty quickly be going back to testifying in front of the county commissioners. And I do strongly feel that it's up to us to both pay attention to what's going on and to speak up. I don't want to go into it, but I did look up developments that have been approved by the county commissioners since January 1st of 2026. If you read through this list, you will see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new developments, not all new. Fitch's 15 new homes in Granville are part of this number. But one's for 196 units, one's for 224 units. These 7 developments total 719 new units. So we are still seeing growth, although we noted in a recent newspaper article that rents, not in Chatham County, but in Orange County, are actually starting to come down. Everyone's always said to me, how many apartments can we possibly need? And I think we're starting to see them get overbuilt a little bit, and rents are actually coming down. But I do think it's important to remember that Farrington Village was just a big farm before Fitch decided to develop it, and the Farringtons certainly wanted him to, since no one wanted to keep the farm going. I think we call this progress. That when Briar Chapel came along, people were very, very opposed to it. And yet I have many friends in Briar Chapel, and they are extremely happy with where they live. But there is just a knee-jerk type of reaction to growth. And I would urge you all to try and be a little more objective about it. I mean, we all know the term NIMBY, not in my backyard. I have 2 other favorites that I've heard for many years. One of those is banana, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And my other favorite is cave, which is citizens against virtually everything. And I did want to mention also that both the county and the city actually have very good websites. It's not that complicated to go on and see what they're looking at, and literally see with maps. And one of the complaints I have against the county, and I know we have at least one former planning commissioner member here, is we know all about the residential side, but the county has very few restrictions as far as I've been able to ascertain on commercial, so that once a use is approved as commercial, they can't tell me. I can't tell you how often I called them to try and find out if that really was going to be O2 or not. And they always said, well, we don't really know. Well, there might be a car wash. Well, so I don't know why that is. That was not true in Montgomery County. But I should also add that from the standpoint of taxes, residential uses really don't pay for themselves. It's the residents who need schools, who need police, who need the ambulances far more than businesses do. And in general, it's considered that the right ratio is you should be 70% residential and 30% commercial, because they pay far higher taxes and require far fewer services. But I heard recently that in Chatham County, it's much closer to 90% residential and 10% commercial. And that will be a problem for all of us. I will just end with this. I also kind of think that I would not be at all surprised if Farrington Village actually ends up being annexed by the town of Pittsboro, not in the immediate future, but I know this has been discussed by the county commissioners. Things like wastewater, which really should be done, I think that should be a public service that's being provided. But the county, because so much of the county is rural, doesn't want to burden their rural residents with paying for a regional wastewater plant. And Pittsboro, now that they're growing, has written, the way I read it, that they can annex as long as something is contiguous. We're not contiguous yet, but hey, if you have a circle like this and you add that, then suddenly that's contiguous to the next thing. So I would not be at all surprised if at some point I always tell people, well, my mail address is Pittsboro, but I don't really live in Pittsboro. But I might. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I hope that this has been somewhat helpful in terms of what's been happening here in Chatham County. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rose. Wonderful talk as always. I just wanted you to um, address briefly how much power the county commissioners have. Because if you read next door, people assume that they have total power and can approve or disapprove anything.
No, oh, I'm glad you asked that.
And
Good question.
And there's two things. I mean, I'm aware of a year or two ago, there was a proposed bill that I don't think passed about prohibiting the imposition of affordable housing requirements. But, then there's a general point that the owner of land has a lot of inherent rights as a property owner just here in America. And I would just say one thing to those who are very opposed to further development, which is if we're going to turn this state blue, we need more people.
Yes, we do. Well, so you raised a couple of interesting points, and excuse me, one I meant to mention. If you're a planner and you get an application to build a development and it meets the requirements of the laws on the books, as a planner, your obligation is to recommend approval. And I think that's important. You may hate it, but you're supposed to recommend approval. Now, I already said I don't think there are quite enough regulations on the books, perhaps, but right now I do really feel that the planners have a hard job because, like I say, they can't say they don't like it. In Montgomery County, Costco, we have two Costcos in Montgomery County. I think there are only two. And the one in Silver Spring, well, neither of them have gas stations. I didn't even realize for the longest time that that's really where Costco makes so much of their money. And Costco, for the one in Silver Spring, suddenly decided they wanted to build a 110 pump gas station. And they were, yeah, that's a really big gas station. And it it came into our staff, and it turns out, and just try and picture this, there was an older established community with a community pool and lots of homes, not that far from the Costco with its big parking lots already. And they said, "You're going to ruin us." And we said, "We have no grounds to say no. It meets all the requirements." However, we decided, oh, let's go out on a limb. We're going to recommend denial. And we did. And they didn't sue us, and it didn't happen. So as we often said back then, you can do all sorts of things as long as you don't get sued, but that doesn't always happen. I put a moratorium on once to try and stop something from happening, and you can easily get sued for putting a moratorium. They have to be very defined and lengthened. So the planners, like I say, that was the only decision I can think of where we decided to really buck the rules. And we were just lucky because it's really surprising we did not get sued. And they would have won because we had no grounds on which to turn it down. But at some point, as we are all learning more and more these days, you just have to stand up and say something. But so from the standpoint of the planners, I don't think they have enough rules to fall back on. And so most of them recommend approval. But from the standpoint of your elected officials, I mean, one of the things that surprises me here is that when I mentioned that the MMC PPC was created to try and keep it divorced from politics, interestingly enough, in Prince George's, a planning board traditionally is made up of citizens. They don't have to have a background. In fact, we really don't want them to have a background in planning. We want them to look at projects from the standpoint of someone who lives in the community. In Prince George's County now, things that are approved by the planning board can be vetoed by the county commissioners. In Montgomery County, that is not true. So the planning board in Montgomery County is extremely powerful. And I would argue that your county commissioners here are actually quite powerful. But I can also tell you that most of the time, they will tell you that they're relying very heavily on the recommendations of staff. And like I say, staff is really, they've got to approve it recommend approval. So, and of course, county commissioners, once an application is before them, they're not supposed to meet with different people and talk about it. That's considered a no-no because you might talk to one county commissioner and the other four haven't heard that discussion. And so you're really not supposed to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think they have really quite a bit of power if they want to wield it.
I have a question about wastewater treatment.
Mhm.
I've heard it said that if Chatham County were to build more wastewater treatment facilities, it would actually encourage growth. Do you see it that way?
No,
Okay, and can you say why?
I do agree with that with a lot of roads, but that doesn't mean I'm against building roads necessarily. I mean, there's no question that if you build roads, you kind of open up new areas to development, just the way it is. But wastewater, it's funny because where we lived in Montgomery County, we had another odd entity. Again, it was the sister to MMC PPC, and that was WSSC, which was the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission. And WSSC was way over near I-95 in Prince George's County, and they collected wastewater from a vast area, but it did mean that was something that the developers knew they had to. They often had to build the connector pipes. They had to pay a connector fee to join into the system, but everything was strictly watched and controlled. And I haven't noticed here. Like I say, I don't trust the individual wastewater facilities very much, to be very honest. And we certainly all know our water supply. I think we're okay here. I always try and emphasize that Pittsburgh's water, which is soon or I think already, maybe not, they may not have finished the pipes, but it's going to be coming from Sanford. Because they are lower downstream in Jordan Lake and they get a lot more of the upstream pollution from places like Burlington. But no, I think having a regional wastewater treatment plant is absolutely essential, to be very honest.
We have a Zoom question
Okay.
from 15 minutes ago, really, guys. Sorry. And the question is, what are your thoughts and concerns about the Disney Asteria community and development within Chatham Park? What opportunities might it enable or challenges it might create?
Great question, because my husband, who's here in the audience, we're not big Disney fans. I want to explain that. But like I say, we are kind of in favor of continuing growth. And he just can't believe, Disney has more. This is being done by Disney Imagineering, which is a whole new venture really for Disney Imagineering. So far, they've done one development in the United States of America. It's still being built, and it is near Palm Springs, California. And what is shocking to both of us, because we've talked to some people about this, for about 6 months, they sent representatives into the area, incognito, you might say, and they talked to people and they tried to get a feel for, what the community was like. And out of all the thousands and thousands of zip codes in the country, they chose 27312. Yeah. And we find that amazing. I also think the name is just dreadful. It's asteria, and to me, it always means hysteria. I don't know. To my knowledge, it has no meaning. It's just the word they picked. Nevertheless, I can tell you again, because I'm a planner, we go down to Chatham Park quite a bit, and just to see what they've done in the last 2 weeks. And when we actually go to, and we're not moving, so have no fear, but I like my village life, to say the least. But, if we go into like a model home, people come in and all the time, every time we've been there, and say, oh, is this for the Disney development? I mean, there is no question in my mind that it will attract it's part of Chatham Park. A lot of people know it's within it, but it's actually part of the 22,000 homes. It's not an additional 4,000 homes. The Del Webb community is additional. There are a lot that are additional, but that's not. And I think it will be very good for the county's overall financial situation. And I think we'll maybe get those Democrats that Tony wants to get. I'm not sure. Uh, but on the whole, I don't think it's the Disney. My guess is they will build a top-notch development. Uh, it's not clear to us just how they're going to weave the Disney element into it. We've heard their clubhouse will have a Disney theme, uh, but we don't know many more details than anyone else does. But like I say, I think getting all those new rooftops in Pittsburgh will be a challenge, but I think the Disney will probably be one of the better parts of that. I'm not supposed to pick, they're supposed to pick, so.
I just have a quick factual question. I probably have my facts wrong. That's why I'm asking you. Back when we were first really hearing a lot about Chatham Park being developed down here, and we were concerned about Chatham County and what's the commission going to say. And I thought I understood that a lot of that authority was, and the decision making was done by the city of Pittsburgh and not by Chatham County. What is Chatham County's role and what is Pittsburgh's role?
I don't have a perfect answer for that. It is mainly Pittsburgh's role. That I can tell you. There are some things that they are at least collaborating on to try and determine. But yes, I will tell you that it's funny, when I was still living up north, so to speak, I saw what was happening with Chatham Park. I saw it get approved. And I thought to myself, well, maybe we should move now and I'll just go to work for Chatham Park. And I have a feeling if I'd done that, I would at least understand. It really is part of Pittsburgh, but you always run into this in Rockville. Rockville was the county seat of Montgomery County. So we were actually a part of the county. It's even more confusing than this situation. And yet the county, when they would try and meet with companies to encourage them to locate, they would show them everything but Rockville because they considered us a separate entity responsible for our own economic development. So what you want to do, obviously, is all be working together. So I think, as I said, that we'll see the borders of the town of Pittsburgh expand, and they're going to need to bring in more planners. The one thing I didn't mention is Maryland National Capital Park and Planning just in Montgomery County had 140 planners. Because it took us, I remember interviewing a planner from Houston, and I said to him, how many preliminary plans do you do in a year? And he said, oh, thousands. That was Houston, where they really don't have zoning. I mean, we were lucky if we did 50 in Montgomery County in a year, even if they were little, because we had so many hoops they had to jump through. So yeah, I can't really answer your question, but it really is in the jurisdiction of Pittsburgh.
That Montgomery County aren't things our county can do about relative because it's all been done by the city.
For Chatham Park, yes, but for a lot of these other developments, the ones that I brought in tonight are all in Chatham County, and that's still 700 and something units. And likewise, like I say, the county has a habit of, again, talking well, but then not quite following through. And I really mean that with the Unified Development Ordinance, because they keep saying if you read the principles of that ordinance, and they're pretty brief and they're worth reading, they really talk about maintaining the rural character of Chatham. Now, I understand that that's in the other 90%, but they should be, I think, a little more cognizant of what they're doing, not to me, because I'm a newbie. I'm one of the ones you can fault, I guess, for moving down here like so many others, but for the people who've been here a long time, to have that whole aura change, everywhere? Can't they save a few? We don't have a lot of parks even in this part of the county. So I just think that's, again, another area they could step up.
I know there's a lot of questions. Are you all okay going until 8:10? Okay, then let's keep going with quick questions and quick answers.
I wanted to know, where do regulations come from? Who promulgates them?
From my work with the county, I would say from the state. In Montgomery County, this is important, we couldn't adopt regulations that were less strict than the state. We could and we did adopt regulations that were more strict than the state. And what's interesting, again, because we were so strange up there with our separate planning board, but it was really the county commissioners up there, or county council people as they were called, who were solely responsible for adopting those regulations if they were going to be stricter than the states.
Rose, I served for 8 years on the Chatham County Planning Board. I can clarify a couple of things. State law in North Carolina gives cities and towns something called extraterritorial jurisdiction, to use an acronym ETJ. Chatham Park is being developed under the ETJ of Pittsburgh. So it's not the Chatham County Planning Board that's doing that. The second point I'd like to make, Rose mentioned this earlier about impact fees. Oddly enough, Chatham County is the only county in North Carolina that levies an impact fee. I find it hard to believe that places like Wake and Mecklenburg with Charlotte don't do that. Another point I'd like to make, Rose made the point, you can't reject the development because you just don't like them. There are criteria to be met, which is having to do with the health, safety, and welfare of the community. But the county commissioners here have listened to the people. Several years ago, we had a case where Publix wanted to build a grocery store over where Polk's Landing is. The people at Polk's Landing were vociferous against it, and the commissioners listened to them. We told Publix, we think you're a great company. We'd like you to come here, but not there, not now. They voted Publix down, and Publix could have sued, but they folded up and went home. We have another case now that I won't go into. It's very complicated, but the whole Summit Church proposal, the county commissioners voted it down. They're being sued. It's in the courts now. But anyway, that's all I want to say.
Well, actually, that last point you mentioned, I'm so glad you did, because this shows a little bit the difference between a more rural county and a northern county. David Delaney, who of course is a county commissioner and who is not running again, unfortunately, he used to hold Friday morning coffee and conversations once a month at Breakaway Cafe. And they were really an opportunity for people to come and talk to him about issues that weren't in front of them yet. But the issue of Summit Church came up. And I said to him, David, you don't stand a chance on Summit Church. There is a federal law called, another acronym, RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. And Montgomery County got so tired of getting sued over churches that we made churches a by right use in any zone in the entire county, because it basically said, the federal law basically says you can't turn down a church because you don't like the church. And Summit Church, I'll be surprised if it doesn't happen here. I just can't figure out any grounds that, might make, and so people just have to deal with it. And a church, some of the residents in that area actually felt that a church would be a better use than a lot more houses with all day, everyday traffic. So it's but yeah, that's a good point, and I'm glad you raised it.
Hi, thank you. Can you talk about the paradox? As we said, that Chatham Park is really being controlled by Pittsburgh. But when you make a development, that the state and the county have to provide other services. And they're obligated to do that, I guess, aren't they? And how do we pay for that?
Well, of course, theoretically, again, particularly up front, I mean, housing values have gone up. My property taxes went up. I mean, we're getting more revenue than we were a few years ago. So there should be revenue to pay for more of these things, at least now, which is why I wish they were, again, up north. If you were causing enough increase in traffic that a traffic light was going to be required, the developer had to both pay for and install that traffic light. We often, in fact, wanted the developers to build the roads, even if they were going to be turned over as they are here to the state. That's another whole issue, state roads. But no, there should be that the real trick in Montgomery County, counties in Maryland, counties were the preeminent jurisdiction in terms of authority. Here, cities are the preeminent jurisdiction. And I was just saying to my brother-in-law who's visiting, there are only 3 cities in Chatham. It's Pittsburgh, it's Siler City, and it's Goldston. And they're very small. And they don't want to take on a regional facility. It's really going to be up to the county to take on a regional facility. So everyone's just pointing fingers. And I'm not sure how that will change.
So another concern is that the battery that's running Zoom on the computer is running out. So I think we're going to have to stop the Zoom, but let's have a couple more questions in the building if you're just desperate. But Zoom people, rather than have it just cut off, we're telling you, you're going to get cut off.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, the extraterritorial jurisdictions between the city and the county, is that all across North Carolina uniform, or is it specific county by county different?
I believe it's across the state. Bill, am I correct? Yeah.
So I don't quite understand where in the planning process energy concerns, education concerns, health concerns factor in to the planning process. Can you help me understand that a bit?
So again, and I could have done more research than I did to learn all the ins and outs on things like schools. If you read different planning publications, in a state like Hawaii, for example, they actually accepted a developer contribution to build an entire new school for the development they plan to have. That's unusual, but we do, again, require impact taxes that go towards schools. We had a very powerful school board up there that was, and the planning department was very involved in this. We did something, can I remember the name of it now? Every 5 years, every 3 years, we relooked at our quote growth policy. We tried to project the number of students. I mean, Orange County, if you've been paying any attention, is actually closing elementary schools right now because the birth rate has dropped. I'm a little surprised given all the people that are moving in every day, but for now they are doing that. So there are I mean, I don't know of other jurisdictions that look every 3 years at a comprehensive urban growth policy where you're trying to determine if you have the infrastructure. And even if you decide you don't, usually the development forces are such that you end up finding solutions to still be able to allow development to go forward. It's a powerful force, development. People need to have a place to live. I mean, another one of the paradoxes I already talked about is, I can't tell you how many people used to come to me saying, because this was the early days of it, we don't have good cell phone coverage. We need better cell phone coverage. So a cell phone provider would come in and say, we want to build a tower. No, you can't build a tower near my house. What's the matter with you? So it's hard. And we were building a building in downtown Rockville once, new office building, not terribly big. And I got a phone call from an irate person saying, "You're not requiring sidewalks." I said, "What are you talking about? The plan calls for 11-foot wide sidewalks. As wider sidewalks are something we know really is very good, particularly in a downtown area." Well, the building was still under construction. They had a construction fence around the whole project, and yeah, they hadn't built the sidewalk yet. But it's just there's this assumption that it's all bad, but it's not all bad. And I again can't tell you how many of the if you can get companies, and these days it's hard because companies are more globalized, et cetera, but they were huge contributors to a lot of the more social service oriented things that we tried to do in Rockville. They really put real money in and had tutoring programs and